Hey, this is Aaron.
And Blake, we're AV Data.
Thanks for walking through this Alteryx Weekly challenge with us.
In this video, we're taking a look at Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 226, titled Flexibility, focusing on Alteryx's flexible nature. So we're given starting points of the Alteryx Irvine and Broomfield office locations, and we're asked to find the midpoint using three different methodologies. We're taking three different paths to solving the problem. As always, the weekly challenge can be found on the Alteryx Community Academy page under Weekly Challenge. We're taking a look at the 226 start file if you'd like to download and follow along with us. One of our favorite things about Alteryx is the flexible nature and the ability for different people to solve problems in different ways. And we're going to solve the same problem using three different approaches. So our starting data will be the same for all three tool containers we work through. We're given field 1 and field 2 that have the latitude and longitude for the Irvine and Broomfield office locations, and we want to find the midpoint. So one approach can be using the spatial tools, and first using the create points tool to define a spatial object for our two office locations. Then we can use some additional spatial tools to build a line and find the midpoint of that line. But first up, we need the create points tool and map in our longitude and latitude to create the centroid, which is a spatial object. And given the structure of our data table at this point, we can use a polybuild tool and build a sequence polyline of our centroid field. In this case, our centroid field just has 2 points, and the polyline will allow us to connect the dots and draw a line between those 2 points. So on the output side of the polybuild tool, we now only have one record and one field with our spatial line. And then using the spatial info tool from the spatial tool category, we can focus on that line and output the centroid as X and Y fields. After we run the workflow and take a look at the output of the spatial info tool, we see that we have centroid X and centroid Y as new fields, and those values match exactly to the X and Y in our desired output. So we can get to our final stage and match the output by dropping in a select tool, dropping off that spatial object now that we've used it to define the midpoint, and rename our fields as X and Y. A different approach that doesn't involve the spatial tools at all would be to use the actual numbers of the latitude and longitude coordinates and perform some math to find the midpoint. So without using multi-row logic, we will have to restructure or change the orientation of our data table in order to use a formula tool to find the difference in longitude and latitude and then find the midpoint given those two differences. And so we're going to use a really popular combination of transform tools, the transform and crosstab, to pivot the data table so that it's more friendly for us to use a formula tool downstream. So here in the crosstab, grouping by name, using those record ID values of 1 and 2 to create our new fields, and taking the value as the value we want to map in the crosstab tool, we now have a much friendlier structure for us to drop in a formula tool and calculate our midpoint. So we could do this in one expression. I'll choose to build it out in 2 just so it's a little bit easier to review. So first off, the difference between the two coordinates I'll define as our delta, and here just subtracting the values from position 2, or position 1 from position 2 rather, and then we'll actually calculate the latitude and longitude values for the midpoint. So starting at field position 1, if we add half of the difference, or in other words, the delta value divided by 2. And adding that value to the midpoint, to the starting position of field 1 will give us the coordinates for the midpoint. So the output of the formula tool will show us these 2 new fields. At the end of the day, we only care about the midpoint coordinates, or that new field off to the far right. But in order to match the desired output, we need to take these 2 coordinates and cross-tab them into the desired shape. So this time we won't do any grouping. We'll map the new column headers from the field names and have those mid values as our values for transformation. And lastly, using a select tool, we can change the position of fields X and Y and update their field names. And just like that, we've matched the output again. The third method that we'll use will involve spatial objects, but we're really going to focus on using the summarize tool to process those spatial objects, which is a really fascinating use of the summarize tool. So first up, we will use that create points tool again, just to define that centroid field of those spatial objects. And referencing the map, we can just take a look and see where those points are on the map. And because the centroid field is a spatial object, our actions that are available include all of the actions in the spatial category. So you'll notice that we have the ability to combine spatial objects, and we can even create the centroid of a spatial object once we have an object created where the centroid would be of value to us. So this first step is really just to flatten these 2 points on the map and create one object with the 2 points. And now that this exists as one spatial object, we can create the centroid of that spatial object. So after our second summarize tool in a row, we should have a new point on the map. And if I zoom out, we should be a little northeast of the Grand Canyon. There we go. Halfway between Irvine and Broomfield. And in order to pull out the X and Y values, we can choose the centroid as X and Y. We could just choose to call out the X and Y values. That works as well. And lastly, using a select tool, we can update our field positions of X and Y and drop off that spatial object if we'd like.
Thank you for learning with us today. Good luck on your Alteryx journey.
For more information on custom training, managed service automations, and more, please visit our website at abdataconsulting.com.